Greetings hobbyists, this is Artisans of All, and in this video we're going to be making a concrete column only using hard surface techniques. This video comes about after a message I received from someone who'd watched the video on how to sculpt detail into stone to make it look like convincing stone, asking if there was a way to do this without using sculpting tools. And I thought this was an interesting challenge, so I thought I'd put out a video for it. Now, I do want to preface this by saying I don't think that you will ever get something to look as good as using the sculpting tools just by using hard surface techniques. In fact, you're probably going to be best off if you want something really damaged to use a combination of the two. Now, if you want to have a look at the video where I use the sculpting techniques to give a realistic stone texture, then there's a link in the top right hand corner and in the description. So do check that one out as well. Let me know what you think is best. So I'm starting by making a column here. I'm just doing this 10mm by 10mm, and I've just picked an arbitrary height that looks about right. And as always, I've pressed Ctrl and A to apply the scale. Now, as I say, this is not going to be perfect, so we're going to have to go about this in a way that gives the most convincing possible finish to this. And to do that, what we really need to do is make it recognisable to the person viewing it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press Tab, and I've got machine tools, so I've got this pie menu, and I'm going to go into edge mode. If you don't have machine tools, just click on 2 after you've clicked Tab, and I'm going to press Ctrl and R to put a single edge loop down the centre there. I'm going to do it the other side, and then in the Z direction, I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to put in a few more. In fact, let's go to the side so we can see this. And I'm going to make them approximately square. I don't need to be too exact at this point, and I'm going to talk about why this is important later. This isn't totally essential, but it does give a better end result. Then we're going to select all of the edges around the side and at the top by using Shift Alt and clicking on each edge in turn. And I'm going to just give these a small bevel just because concrete rarely forms in this perfectly sharp way. So Ctrl and B, and then I'm just going to rotate my mouse wheel up somewhere to about there. I'm going to go to 8 just to give a nice rounded edge, something like that. So that's going to help with our feel here straight off that we've got this slightly enlarged bevel. And now we need to start making the bit that we're going to take out of this, and we're going to use a boolean for this. But what's going to be important is how we set up the boolean in advance. So Shift and A, and I'm going to bring in a quad sphere. Again, I've got this because I've got machine tools, and all it does is, if I just G to move that out, it makes a sphere that is made of quads, which is very important if we're going to subdivide this. If you don't have machine tools, one, go and get it, it's free. I've got a number of videos on machine tools. There's a link to the playlist in the top right hand corner. If you don't, just Shift and A, bring in a cube, and then you're going to subdivide that cube from the cube just for anyone that doesn't have machine tools. So all I'm going to do is press Ctrl and let's say 3 to enter into 3 subdivisions, and you'll see this basically looks the same. The only thing that's different here is this isn't actually a perfect sphere. You have to add a cast modifier to this to make it perfectly spherical if that's what you want. For this, it's not particularly relevant. Now I am going to apply this, so just come in here and click apply, but we are going to add more subdivisions to this later. But before I do that, I'm just going to map out the general shape that I want for this. So I'm just going to press S and Z to go somewhere about there, and then I'm going to turn on proportional editing, go into vertex mode and just grab some vertices like that, and then making sure proportional editing is on, seem to have missed that, G, and then I'm going to scroll my mouse wheel up to make this a little bit more deformed, something like that. And I could do that in another direction if I wanted to, just to make this a little bit more interesting. Then let's position this approximately where we want it. So we're going to cut out one of the corners or a bit of the corner to look like some damage. And this is going to be the key bit here, is making this damage look like something that's recognizable as concrete. So at this point, we're going to need to modify this cutter quite heavily. What I'm going to do is I'm going to press the / button on my number pad so I can see this by itself, and we're going to be adding some modifiers to do that, to make something that looks as far as possible like a concrete texture. First thing I'm going to do is add in a subdivision surface modifier. So obviously we've used one before, but this one's quite important and it's going to be affecting what we've got later, so we can up that to 1 or 2, whatever we choose. Then we're going to add in another modifier, and we're going to add displacement modifier. And you see everything got bigger straight away because at the moment it's displacing everything by 1. So in this instance, 1mm, and I can move that but it's displacing it every direction across the normals, and we don't want that. We want to create a texture that's going to look like concrete or broken concrete. So what we want to do is change what this is doing. Instead of just having it by a flat value, we're going to add in a texture. So I'm going to click on that plus for new, and you'll notice straight away it creates a texture which is causing a mess. Don't worry about that for now. And then we need to determine the texture that we're using. We can do that in two ways. Firstly, we can click on this button to show textures in the texture tab, or we can click directly on the texture properties tab. I'm just going to click there, and you'll see we've got this texture, which is, you'll notice, the same name as here. And you can, if you want to, rename it. So for example, concrete. Go to the tab, and now it's saying concrete. And we're going to be using an image for this. So I'm going to click there, and I'm just going to use clouds. Now straight away this looks a bit of a mess, but you can see what it's trying to achieve over in the preview window where we've got these lighter and darker areas. Now this is going to require a little bit of jumping backwards and forwards, and you'll see what I mean as I go through this, but we need to turn this into something that looks a bit concrete-like. In the modifier properties, so back to there, we can do that by fiddling around with the strength. So that's going to affect how much this is going to be sticking out. So for example, something like there. We will come back to this and tweak. And then back in the texture tab, again, either here, either one of the tabs, I can change the size. Now what this size is effectively the different sizes of the blobs that are being created. So I can make those smaller, so we get a lot finer blobs, or I can make them larger to give larger blobs. The other thing that we can do is we can come up here and modify the subdivision surface modifier to make this look smoother. So I've got that up to 4. This is going to be very dependent on what your computer can handle. So if this starts to slow it down too much, just bear in mind you can always bring that down a bit. So between these we can make quite a nice realistic looking damaged concrete, remembering that this is going to be cut out of the column. So I'm just going to tweak that a little bit. Let's have a look at that size, maybe a little bit smaller, something around there, and then come back again, fiddle with the scale, maybe something about there, and keep tweaking the subdivision surface until you get something like that you want. Now I'm actually going to bring that down to about 4. Do bear in mind the size that you're going to be printing at if this is for 3D printing. Realistically, bear in mind that this is 10mm, so a centimetre. This is very fine, and while it may look a little bit granular to us, realistically when you're looking at that and that's only a centimetre, that's going to look perfectly alright. In fact, actually that size might be a little bit too small, so let's up that a little bit. Once you're happy with this, and do remember this is going to be non-destructive, at least initially, so we can play with this afterwards, all we need to do is cut this object out of this, so we're going to use a difference boolean. Now I always use bool tools for this, so if you don't have bool tools, just go to edit, preferences, come to add-ons and type in bool, and then make sure that box is ticked, and then save preferences. And what that allows me to do is shift click the object that I want it to be cut out of, and then press Ctrl and minus on my number pad. It's going to take a couple of seconds, and then we can see what this has done. It has cut this out, and if I just go to my object here and press H, you can see we've got this nice concrete texture. And if we want to add to this anymore, we can always make it visible again up in our object outliner, make that visible, and I can always tweak this. Now I will say it's best to do this beforehand, because at the moment it straight away has to reinterpret that, which is going to slow your computer down. So for example, if I start upping the strength a bit, you'll notice we've got a bit more delay. And for example, that, if I press H, to me doesn't look very much like concrete. So we need to be quite careful with this. And in fact, we can actually fiddle around with this here without having the object visible. So I'm quite happy with that around there. And now, just to have a look at why we're adding in those extra loop cuts, if you see here, this might be difficult for you to make out in YouTube because the video quality isn't perfect. But if I go to my annotate tool, you should be able to notice here there are some little lines. Basically you've got a line there, and you've got a few more coming off of here, like that, and some more here. If you can't see it in YouTube, I apologize about that. There's nothing that I can really do, but when you do this yourself, you will notice that. Now those are lines that are being created by Blender to interpret what we've put in place. But these won't actually remain when we apply this, because we've got, if we go into edge mode again, these edges here that are cutting into or going across the boolean, which will actually give it something to attach to. Now, if you do want to lessen these lines, if I zoom out, actually you can see them slightly more. I could always add in an extra loop cut here, and you'll see that those lines then only stop at that loop cut. It doesn't go all the way to the edge. Again, I'm not sure how well you'll be able to see this, and to be honest, that's more important if you're doing this for CG work, not for 3D printing. Because what we're going to do is we're going to go here and apply it, and then those lines won't be as visible. Okay, you can still see them when you zoom out, to be fair, so it could be worth doing it, but it won't show up in your print because there aren't any physical edges there. Now we can see this, and hopefully you'll agree that this is starting to look a bit more like concrete. That texture's a little bit recognizable, but I would recommend there is one final thing that I would do to make sure that in the mind of the viewer, this looks like concrete. Now, it could be that you go in and actually sculpt these edges to make it look a little bit more realistic. That's definitely a good way to go. You could also add in more damage, and that's going to again make it look nice and realistic. But one thing that you'll normally find if you've got some sort of concrete post is there'll be some supporting metal structure inside that's made of what we call rebar. So we're going to make some rebar to put into this, again, just to make sure that the person looking at it straight away cottons onto the fact, oh, this is concrete. So I'm going to Control and A, and I'm going to bring in a cylinder to make this rebar with. And I'm actually going to have a look at this. 32 is probably a bit much. I'm just going to go down to 16 just because of the size. And then I'm going to move this aside. Remember to turn proportional editing off, so G, and we're going to start modifying this. So first thing we're going to do is make this rebar type structure. So if you haven't seen rebar before, it looks like the image that's coming up on the screen now. Now realistically, at a 28mm scale, you wouldn't see those ridges, but we want to make something that's recognizable. So go into face mode. If you don't have machine tools, that's by pressing tab and 3. And then we're just going to select 2, not select the next 2, and so on. So we've gone all the way around. And this is why I always pick things that multiply out by 2. So I always do cylinders as either 4, which obviously would be a cube, then 8, then 16, then 32, 64, and so on. It means you can always do this. Then if you've got hard ops, you can just press Q and then Alt over EM macro and click, and it will start extruding these out. If you don't, I'm just going to undo that, come over to your extrude, click and hold, extrude long normals, and then just pull that out from that stick. So we've got these, and these are going to form our ridges. Go into vertex mode, again without machine tools, just press 1 when you're in edit mode. I'm going to grab all the ones at the top, delete those, and the vertices, and then I'm going to dissolve the vertices that are just there. So that is Control and X, and you'll notice that leaves us with this face. Back into object mode, and we're going to use a modifier, and we're going to be using a screw modifier, which straight away looks like a mess, but that's only because we haven't done the height of the screw. And as soon as I can start doing that, you'll notice what this is doing. It's creating these nice ridges. So I'm just going to move somewhere about there. That looks about right to me. And then I can always make this longer by adding iterations, which effectively just makes another version on top of it. So 2 and then 3, and that's probably tall enough. Now looking at this, scale wise, this is a bit much. So I'm going to press S and scale it down to somewhere about there. Might need an extra iteration to make that work. And then I can put this in place. So I'm just going to go from top view, G, and I want that about there. And that might have to, yep, G and Z that down a little bit. So there we go. And hopefully with that rebar, it's going to make this just, again, a little bit more recognizable as something that is concrete with that supporting structure inside. Now, when we get to the point to boolean these together, there is one important thing. If I isolate that by pressing / on the number pad, and this is that the top faces don't get created. So we are going to have to apply this and then go into edge mode, Alt select that edge and press F to create a face, and then we'll do the same along the bottom as well. So Alt select on that edge and then F to create a face. Back to object mode and / so we're not isolated anymore. At this point, it's final check time. Is that in a place we're happy with? Yep, that's pretty much in equally on both sides. You could do that perfectly if you wanted to. I don't think it's necessary here. Once again, we're going to use ball tools, but this time we don't want a difference, we want a union. So click on the object, shift click on the object we want it to be combined with, and this time Control and plus. Now, if this doesn't look right, it might be because your solver is set to fast and you want this set to exact. To be honest, even if it does look okay with fast, set it to exact because it's going to do more work and it's going to reduce what you need to fix. H to hide that object, and we've got this, and if we look into the object here, you should be able to see that we've got this cutting through. Once you're happy with that, click on the object and we're going to apply these booleans. So apply. Now we have got a slight issue here, or we're going to have a slight issue. We've been dealing with a lot of small faces, and small faces intersecting with other small faces or combining with the other small faces has a tendency to create problems for 3D printing. Now if I go to 3D print and check all, we can see just how bad this is. And importantly, we have 0 non-manifold edges. That's the bit we really care about. We also care about the intersecting faces and the non-flat faces. Now, you can just use 3D Builder with Microsoft to fix that. I have talked about this in previous videos, but I'm actually going to do another video on booleaning so I can talk about this a little bit more. It's not really the subject for this video. So if you want to see that, do click subscribe so you get notified. But just having a quick look, if I go to vertices and click intersecting faces, we'll notice where these start to appear. And actually most of them are on this outer edge here, but some of them are between these minor points here. For example, this would be a classic intersecting face where we've got no problem with the boolean itself, but we've got these points here that are not really enjoying the way they're interacting. Now again, I will talk about this more in a subsequent video, but realistically what you want to do is start merging some of these together. So I'm going to turn my auto merge vertices on, GG to move that up there, that one there can move there, that one if I GG up there, and then that one I might actually GG to there, and then that one down to that corner. Now, like I said, I'm not going to go through this in detail. That's going to be a subject for another video. Let's GG that one down there. But what you'll notice I'm doing is trying to solve where a lot of these vertices are going to cause potential problems. So that one down to there. And now if I do that check all again, my intersecting faces should have decreased. And you'll notice now none of those are problems. So when I click on it, they don't become highlighted. As I said, I'm going to do a video on that totally separately, but that is how we can fix our intersecting faces. Most of the time you just want to make sure that you do not have vertices that are joining faces part way through. So if I just find another example, let's say here, go to vertex mode. This one's a little ugly. So we've got that point there, that point there, that point there, that point there, could join to this point there. I'm going to do this one slightly different. M, merge at last, and that will solve a lot of those problems. We've got vertices here, here, and here. M at last, and then this one, or in fact two of them, joining onto this plane halfway through. So I'm actually going to GG, move that one down there, and GG, move that one up there. Oh, and there is one more. GG, move that one down. In fact, there's several hiding behind each other. Okay, that should, if I go into X-ray mode, we can see, yep, that's sorted that. Check all. And then it's gone down by 2 because we've fixed the 2 faces that we're intersecting. And now we can move on to the next. So bear in mind, 23 things to fix here. Bear in mind they're all mostly in pairs or threes. That's not really going to take that long. And there we go. In what's a relatively short amount of time, I hope you'll agree that that looks pretty convincing as a concrete column. And once printed and painted, you'll be able to make that look very realistic. But just as a reminder, if you want more realism, come in, do the sculpting around the edge here to give those final chips that you'd find on the outer surface and the edges. Have a great day, guys.